Sometimes to see the huge forces that are reshaping our world, you don't actually need to look at a decade of data. All you need to do is look at a single day. And on one particular day, the future arrived in two completely different ways, as a terrifying shock for one industry and as a massive gold rush for another. So, let's break it down.
Okay, so let's dive right into this. The date we're focusing on is January 29th, 2026. We're going to examine the business news from just these 24 hours to really understand the massive and often contradictory changes that are happening all at once.
On one side of the coin, the headlines were just filled with triumph. We're talking about companies posting unbelievable earnings, seeing demand that was described as staggering, and strategies that were just paying off in a huge, huge way. But at the very same time, a completely different story was unfolding. For an entire massive sector of the economy, this was a day of pure panic. A day when a single powerful idea sent investors running for the exits and literally wiped out billions in value. So what powerful idea could possibly cause such a crisis? Well, it all comes down to one of the most powerful forces in our economy today, artificial intelligence. But this wasn't about AI taking over, it was all about the fear of what it could do. Let's get specific. On January 29th, software stocks, which were once the darlings of Wall Street, experienced this incredibly intense sell-off. And we're not talking about just a small dip here. The entire industry was pushed into what's called a technical bear market. And to put a number on that panic, the main software ETF, which is basically a basket of the industry's biggest names, was suddenly down 22% from its recent high. That is a brutal decline, and it was driven by a single fundamental question about the future. So why the sell-off? It was a crisis of confidence. Investors suddenly began to fear that new, powerful AI tools could make traditional software, obsolete. The market was asking a terrifying question. What is software even worth in the age of AI? But here's where the story gets really fascinating. The same exact force that was causing all this panic in one corner of the market was creating an absolute gold rush in another. This is the great paradox of AI. This slide really lays out the two sides of that coin. On the one hand, you have the disruptor, the fear that AI is just going to eat away at existing businesses. But on the other, you have the opportunity, a historic wave of investment for companies building the AI future. Let's look at the sheer scale of that opportunity. On this same day, news broke that Amazon was in talks to invest up to $50 billion in OpenAI. To put that in perspective, that's more than the GDP of many countries. It is a nation-state-level bet on the future of AI. And it's not just about software. The physical infrastructure for AI is just booming. In the last year, Tesla sold $430 million worth of its Megapack batteries to Elon Musk's own AI startup, xAI, just to power its data centers. And who's cashing in on this boom? Well, look no further than Norway's sovereign wealth fund. It posted a staggering $247 billion profit, driven almost entirely by its investments in the tech companies leading this AI charge. So in this world of AI disruption and gold rushes, how are the titans of industry playing their cards? We saw that different giants were choosing very different paths to not just survive, but to win. First, you have Apple, which reported an absolutely monster quarter. As you can see right here, revenue was nearly $144 billion, completely crushing estimates. And a key driver? Look at that bottom line, a 38% surge in sales in China. Apple's strategy is to stick to the fundamentals, focus on incredible hardware, a timeless model that is clearly still working. Now contrast Apple's stick-to-what-works approach with Tesla's radical pivot. On the very same day, Elon Musk announced the end of the line for the cars that started it all, the Model S and X. The reason? To convert the factories to build Optimus humanoid robots, a complete bet on an AI-powered future over their automotive legacy. And winning in this new era isn't just about big tech. Other giants are finding their own paths. General Motors stock is up over 70%, not by making a radical AI pivot, but through sheer execution and focusing on cash flow. Meanwhile, Starbucks is engineering a classic turnaround by going back to basics and focusing on the in-store experience. So we've seen the chaos in the markets and the strategies in the boardrooms, but how does any of this actually affect real people? Let's zoom in on the view from Main Street. A big one is the cost of living. On this day, new data showed that the national median apartment rent had dropped 1.4% over the last year. Now, that is a meaningful change for millions of households. But that national average doesn't tell the whole story. What's fascinating is how localized these effects are. In a boomtown like Austin, Texas, rents are down a whopping 6.3%. But in a place like Virginia Beach, Virginia, they're still rising by 5%. Where you live dramatically changes your economic reality. And it wasn't just about economics. That AI story from the start of our explainer, on January 29th, it physically showed up in the real world for thousands of people. This is a huge milestone. Waymo, the self-driving car company, officially started giving rides to San Francisco's airport. The abstract idea of AI is now a robo-taxi you can take to catch a flight. It's a tangible sign that the future we've been promised is slowly but surely becoming the present. So we have disruption, a gold rush, and the future arriving on our streets. But no single day is ever that neat. On this same day, there were also stories that remind us the world is and always will be wonderfully weird and unpredictable.
And I'm not kidding. On this day, a man with a barbecue fork tried to break a CEO's accused murderer out of jail. At the same time, a new space company went public talking about building a missile defense system called the Golden Dome. You really can't make this stuff up.
So that brings us to the final question. We had the AI panic in the software market, the AI gold rush in venture capital, Apple's hardware triumph, Tesla's robot pivot, and self-driving cars arriving at the airport. When we look back on January 29th, 2026, which of these threats will have mattered most? What will be the headline in the history books?